jump and jump and jump and jump and jump and jump. Oh, is this just you? Kick! Ladies, gentlemen, and haradrim of all ages, when it comes to Barbarian and Diablo 4, there are two real top dogs when it comes to actual meta builds, but that doesn't mean that we can't have some fun, right? A fan favorite build from Diablo 3, and one of my personal favorites as well, as Barb was my main in that game in a number of seasons, was the leapquake build, which became properly a thing when the Might of the Earth set was added, giving earthquakes a 20,000% damage multiplier, which obviously was very silly, but that's where the numbers were by the time that Reapers of Souls expansion was released, so something that huge was needed to make the build viable. In Diablo 4, this build concept makes a return, but in a pretty massively different way. In 3, there was a legendary that let you cast leap 3 times in a row before the cooldown would happen. That's not a thing in this game, but what we do have is the aspect of perpetual stomping, which causes damage with either kick or ground stomp to reset the cooldown of leap, and the aspect of giant strides, which reduces leap's cooldown per enemy damaged by it up to a maximum of 9 seconds. The thing is, with enough points spent and enough cooldown reduction on your gear, you can bring leap's cooldown to 9 seconds and thus make it possible to just leap endlessly through groups of enemies, and of course it's hilarious, but the thing is, with Kick being a part of this build and Kick having a very cool enhancement that just dumps all of your fury to increase its damage massively, you can create a properly coherent build based around the old leapquake concept but in a whole new way, which is why I'm going to call this build drop kick, because, well, you leap around and then kick things, which is basically what a drop kick is anyways. In any case, this build isn't as strong as the main two, of course, but it is reasonably strong anyways, able to beat up enemies 14 levels higher than you without much problem, and its only real weak point is single target situations, which are an incredibly small portion of the game anyways, honestly. So let's go over the skill points, where I've put them, and why, the legendary is required to make it work, and the unique that can put it into overdrive, even though it's not required to make it function in the first place. The stats that you want on your gear, the way that we're using the expertise system, everything to do with your Paragon board, of course, and then how to play the build and any tips that I can give you for it. Without further ado then, let's dive down into the skill tree itself, and for your basic skills, they don't matter too much, but I'd recommend going with Lunging Strike, its enhancement, and then also Combat Lunging Strike as well, to make it grant Berserking for 1.5 seconds after hitting a critical hit with this move. The only reason for this is if you're going into a pure single target scenario, you should move this skill onto your bar instead of Ground Stomp, simply because without multiple enemies you can't spam leap, so this helps you build Fury for a big kick combo. After that, in the core skill node cluster, I'd recommend putting 3 points into Endless Fury to make your basic skill generate 15% more Fury when done with a two-handed weapon, which we will be doing, simply for those rare situations in which you move Lunging Strike onto your bar, because otherwise nothing else in this cluster does anything for us in the slightest, and we need to spend points anyways to move on to the next cluster. Then in the defensive skill node cluster, we of course are taking all of the shouts. They're just too good not to be used in pretty much any Barbarian build currently, so we grab Rallying Cry, as well as its base enhancement and also Tactical Rallying Cry, altogether making this skill give you 30% move speed, 60% increased resource generation, unstoppable for 7.4 seconds with the help of our shout duration increase from later on, as well as just a nice little pop of fury when you cast it. Then we also have Challenging Shout, its enhancement, and then also Tactical Challenging Shout, which altogether taunts nearby enemies and gives you 40% damage reduction, increases your maximum life by 20%, and generates 3 fury anytime that you are damaged by an enemy for 7.43 seconds, just slightly longer than the other shouts. Then we put a single point into Ground Stomp just so you can use it for the on-demand stun and the leap cooldown reset that it gives you. No enhancements here. Then we move on to the Brawling Tree, which is the big one for us today, and we of course are going to grab our final shout in Warcry, with the base enhancement as well, and then also Power Warcry. Altogether, that makes this shout give us a 15% damage multiplier increase to 25% if there are 6 or more enemies nearby when you use it, lasting 7.4 seconds, as well as giving you 4 seconds of Berserking when you activate it. Then we take a full 5 ranks in Kick, its base enhancement as well, and then also Power Kick, and that's the secret sauce to make this truly work. Kick at its base does decent damage, but also has knockback that deals additional damage if you knock the enemies into a wall, but this obviously makes it harder to use as a pure damage skill, especially if you're just knocking things around. That's where Power Kick comes in, having it dump all of your fury if you hit an enemy with it to deal an extra 20% damage per 10 fury spent, which can stack to silly numbers, of course, and it also removes the knockback correct portion, which lets you use it as a proper damage ability and fury spender. Also, not to mention that the first enhancement makes it make enemies vulnerable for a few seconds, and this ability has 2 charges. We put the points into it that we do because they lower the recharge time of this ability, which means more resets for Leap and more opportunities to use this for burst damage. Then of course we're going to be taking the full 5 ranks of Leap itself, as well as its base enhancement and an also power Leap. Altogether that makes this Leap a jumping attack that slams down with your weapon, which has its cooldown lowered by 4 seconds if it doesn't hit anything if you're using it just for general traversal, and it also gives you 40 fury if it does hit something. The ranks of the skill both increase the damage and lower the cooldown, so they are of course very important to have, and you basically need to have 4 bonus ranks to the skill at least between your pants slot and also bonus ranks to the brawling tree skills in general you can get on your amulet to make this build function properly enough to have the infinite leaping ability that it does. Then we grab a bunch of passives in this node cluster, 3 ranks of Booming Voice for a 24% increase in duration of all shouts, and 2 ranks of Raid Leader for 2% maximum life healing per second while your shouts are active. We also grab 1 rank of Aggressive Resistance for 3% damage reduction while berserking, but most notably this is a gateway to get 3 ranks of Battle Fervor, which makes it so damaging an enemy with a brawling skill activates berserking for 3 seconds. The vast majority of our damage is from brawling skills, so this is a permanent bonus for us and it makes the uptime of berserking just absolutely ridiculous, letting us be in that state the majority of the time. After that we move to the Weapon Mastery node cluster, and here we're just picking up some passives, 3 ranks of Pit Fighter for a 9% damage increase multiplier against close enemies and 6% damage reduction from distant enemies as well. 1 rank of Thick Skin for 0.4% base life as Fortify whenever you take damage, mostly just as a gateway for 3 ranks of Counter Offensive. This gives you a 12% damage increase multiplier when you have Fortify. Fuck these wargs that are beating me up, I'm gonna kick them and leapquake them. Then we can go back into the skill tree to talk about Counter Offensive again. This gives you a 12% damage increase multiplier when you have Fortify for more than half of your health, which this build does anyways always. This is the passive that you want ranks of on your amulet if you get the choice. It's just really strong and it's active for all of our damage windows. Then we move to the ultimate skill node cluster, and here again we are just taking passives, 2 ranks of Tempered Fury. This gives us 6 bonus maximum fury, which increases the high-end damage potential for Kick with the enhancement that we have, 3 ranks of Heavy Handed to increase our critical damage with 2-handed weapons, 3 ranks of Wallop to increase bludgeoning weapon damage against vulnerable enemies. This is your second priority as far as amulet passives. If you don't get counter offensive, this is still pretty solid to have. I have 3 bonus ranks of this myself. This affects Leap as we use our 2-handed bludgeoning weapon for that skill, but it doesn't affect Kick as that uses, well, your foot, which I think is arguably a bludgeoning weapon, honestly, but the game doesn't agree.
I have a strong foot.
Then we grab 3 ranks of Concussion for a 45% lucky hit chance to stun enemies with skills that use 2-handed bludgeoning weapons. Leap has a 66% lucky hit activation chance in itself, so that as a result that gives us about a 1 in 3 chance of stunning anything that Leap hits. Then we move on to our key passive, which is going to be Unconstrained. This increases the maximum duration of berserking by 5 seconds and increases a damage bonus that it has as well by 25%. That's all for the skill points then. As for the expertise and technique system, you want to set Leap to use your 2-handed bludgeoning weapon. This gives you a 10% lucky hit chance to gain 2 fury when hitting an enemy, double to 4 while berserking, as well as the secondary bonus at rank 10 of a 15% damage increase multiplier to stunned and vulnerable enemies while you are berserking, which we often are. We apply vulnerable quite a bit too, as we have both the exploit Paragon glyph and Kick itself applies vulnerable as well, and we also have a 1 in 3 stun chance with Leap itself to activate this more. Then we of course grab the 2-handed axe technique for a 15% damage increase multiplier against vulnerable enemies just in general. If you're someone who doesn't know how to set Leap to use a specific weapon, it will auto-select by default your highest weapon damage thing, which should be your 2-handed bludgeoning weapon in this build, as that's what we're actually using as a weapon for our damage, but you can open up the skill menu itself here, and then you can use this to actually cycle which weapon you want to use and pick the bludgeoning weapon specifically. After that, let's talk about our legendaries and the potential unique for this build as well. On your 2-handed weapons, you want one of them to have the Earthquake aspect. This activates an Earthquake when you use Ground Stomp, which obviously isn't our main goal, we're not using Ground Stomp often, but it makes you gain up to a 30% increased damage multiplier while standing in an Earthquake, which is massive for this build. On your other 2-handed weapon for this, the other double effectiveness bonus that you want is the aspect of Retribution. This has a stun chance against distant enemies when they hit you, which is sort of whatever, but more importantly in this slot, it gives you up to an 80% increased damage multiplier against stunned enemies. Again, Leap has a 1 in 3 stun chance the way that we've set up. We also have Ground Stomp, so you have a high chance of of activating this on an average fight. Then on your amulet for the 1.5 times effectiveness bonus, you want to have the aspect of Bolt Kathos to create a high damage earthquake when you use leap, as well as give you up to a 23% damage reduction while standing in earthquakes. You'll see that I have a really good damage roll on this, but a low percentage on the damage reduction itself. The reason for this is that this is actually the codex version of this power. Normally the numerical damage and the percentage roll are sort of tied to each other, but at higher levels and higher item power drops, the numerical value increases, and so while I do have a decently rolled percentage version of Bolt Kathos, the actual damage number is way lower than my codex version of the power above level 85, so I apply the codex version instead, as we care more about the flat damage that this creates whenever we leap than the percentage number of damage reduction realistically. Then our gloves are where things get interesting. I have the Brawler's aspect on here, which makes enemies damaged by kick explode for a pop of damage if they die within 2 seconds of being hit by it. Most often enemies that you hit with kick are just instantly dead, they get one shot, so that just causes a wave of damage around them, which is pretty neat to cause. But you could make a really strong argument to replace this with the Fists of Fate all-class unique within the build. For it to be anywhere close to viable, you need a decent roll though. As you can see, I actually have a max roll Fists of Fate, but it requires level 91 because I found it on my Druid, so I sadly cannot use it quite yet on my Barbarian. But if you do get a max roll of this, it makes any bit of damage that you do deal anywhere from 1% if you get unlucky, up to 300% of its normal damage. But this obviously isn't often used in builds because the glove slots are actually really important. Any build that uses a core skill basically needs to have either non-unique gloves or specifically unique gloves that buff the core skill itself, because that is the slot where you can get bonus ranks of core skills. It can also give you attack speed, also give you crit chance, so it's a normally very important slot. This build uses no core skills though, so this unique is actually on the table, and it's funky because it's full of lucky hit chances, one to heal you, one to give you resource, one to daze enemies, one to immobilize enemies, and our main ability being leap has a 66% lucky hit chance, which actually makes it really strong at applying all of these in actual combat. The daze and the immobilize is fantastic for bosses. Those build up the stagger meter really fast with our lucky hit chance, so it can help alleviate some of the single target issues of this build, and in general, just considering this is a 50% damage increase overall on average, it's really solid, even aside from all the random lucky hit chances. So they are absolutely worth using, but I'd say only if you get a roll with the maximum end of the damage increase above 250%. At the minimum roll, it averages out to a non-existent damage increase. At 250%, it's about a 25% damage increase, which is noticeable enough to be worth losing the normal glove stats, but again, at 300%, this is actually pretty strong. Then for your rings, we have the Bold Chieftain's aspect, of course, reducing the cooldown of our shouts when used near enemies. Then we have the aspect of Giant Strides as well. This is what reduces our leap cooldown when it hits enemies. Ideally, you want a maximum roll on this. That means that you would only have to hit 2 enemies to reach the full cooldown reduction from the aspect, but 4 seconds per enemy is quite usable as well. Then on our dual-wielded weapons, you want the Edgemaster aspect for up to a 20% increase multiplier to skill damage depending on how much fury you have when you cast the skill. Then we also have the Conceited aspect for up to a 25% damage increase multiplier when you have a barrier active, which of course is relevant as we are going to be using the Protector aspect to give us a barrier that is actually the size of my max life pool when damaging an elite on a 30-second internal cooldown. If it wasn't for the fact that the pants are the slot with leap ranks, you could argue the use of Temerity in this build for more uptype on Conceited, but leap ranks are absolutely necessary to make this build really shine, so you probably should not use these pants. Then on our boots, you actually want the aspect of Perpetual Stomping. This is what makes Ground Stomp and Kick both reset the cooldown of leap. This helps a lot in single target situations, but also just if you happen to leap into a smaller crowd of enemies in general. Then for our remaining defensive aspects, you also want to of course use Disobedience. This is just the strongest defensive aspect in the game in most cases for all classes, giving you up to 0.5% total armor increase per stack, up to a maximum of 50% bonus total armor, which is nutty, especially as you get into just higher end content in general. The earthquake damage in this build helps build these stacks really quickly as well, as you'll be launching off a ton of earthquakes, which each deal a ton of ticks, so you can build up a ton of stacks really fast. Then in your last final defensive slot, you want the Numbing Wrath aspect, which gives you some fortify for every fury that you build above maximum. This just helps keep us constantly fortified, which both helps us with damage reduction and the counter-offensive passives damage bonus when you have more than 50% of your max life as fortify. That's it for the aspects then, so what about your general stats themselves? Well, first of all, of course, for gems you want skulls in all of your jewelry, emeralds in all of your weapon for extra crit damage against vulnerable enemies, then sapphires in your armor to reduce damage while fortified. But aside from that, your main priority is the leap ranks on your legs. This both increases the damage and reduces the cooldown of this skill. Past that, you want loads of cooldown reduction on your helmet as well as your amulet as as well to actually put Leap into the range of getting completely reset by the aspect of giant strides. You want bonus maximum fury on your helmet as well as any of your rings if you can to boost the damage of Kick. You want crit chance in spades and in many places that you can actually get it, crit damage as well, vulnerable damage of course, then any resource generation or fury cost reduction is really nice to have too. Damage increase against close enemies is the most valuable of those types of stats as they have the highest roll potential proper, so look for that too. Pure strength is always good to have, and as far as your amulet, you want ranks of all brawling skills if you can find it for cooldown reduction on both Leap and Kick, as well as a damage increase for Leap itself. Ranks of irrelevant passive, which are the two main ones I talked about earlier. Also, movement speed never hurts to have around. As far as defensively though, total armor percentage is great to have. Damage reduction from close enemies is also fantastic. Damage reduction while fortified is really good too. Anything else that applies to this build is nice to have, but those are the three that you really want to aim for defensively. With all that covered then, let's break down our Paragon board itself. On the starting board, you want to head up the right side through the strength nodes to then grab the damage bonus rare node, then right up and around in the snaking path that I've done here to get to the glyph socket. And here you want to slot in the territorial glyph for bonus damage against close enemies for every 5 dexterity purchased in the radius, as well as the secondary bonus of 10% damage reduction from close enemies. Pretty much all enemies in this build will be close, so this is worth having on both fronts. Grab both of the rare nodes that are around, one of the armor increased magic nodes as well as enough dexterity to activate the glyph bonus, then head up the left side of the board to the attachment gate. Here you'll want to stick on the weapon master board with the legendary power in the top left and the glyph socket in the bottom right. Take the right path here to get to the glyph socket itself, and there you'll want to slot in the martial glyph for a boost to magic nodes in the radius and the secondary effect of a 1.2 second cooldown reduction on shouts whenever you cast another shout. This helps significantly on our general shout uptime. Then grab both of the rare nodes nearby and the relevant magic nodes that are near them as well to get the necessary strength to activate the bonus effect of the glyph. Then head out the left side and travel to the Hunter Killer rare node for bonus damage against elites and also bonus move speed after killing an elite. Take the damage increased magic nodes that are beside it, then head back to the glyph area and to get to the board attachment gate on the right side and stick on the decimator board with the glyph socket on the left side. Take the lower path here to get to the glyph socket as quickly as you can and slot in the brawl glyph for now for a bonus to the physical damage increased nodes nearby, of which there aren't any on this board. This affects nothing here, but we get the secondary effect of an 18% increase multiplier to our brawling skills, which is a massive bonus. Grab the rare nodes nearby and the relevant magic nodes in the radius too, then head out the upper side over here to grab the rare node on the right side, which is Pillage, increasing your vulnerable damage and armor. Grab all of the vulnerable damage increased magic nodes nearby as well, then head out the top side of the board and attach the Warbringer board with the glyph socket in the bottom left corner. I realize that there is actually a typo for this board. When you look at it in the board preview screen, it's called Warbringer, but the node on the board itself says it's called Warbinger, missing an R, but it sounds funny if you pronounce it Warbinger, so I can dig it. Head up, then left to path to the glyph socket itself, and stick in the Undaunted glyph for bonus damage while fortified for every 5 willpower in the radius, and also the secondary effect of a bonus 10% damage reduction while fortified. Once your Brawl glyph reaches level 15, you actually want to swap it in here and put Undaunted in the previous board, but activating the secondary effect on Brawl is your main priority with that glyph, so this original order is ideal until you get it to level 15. Once you do though, it has a much larger effect in this slot. Grab the willpower nearby to actually activate the glyph's secondary effect, and also the rare nodes in the area which will give you bonus physical damage, which is why you would want to put Brawl here when it's ready. Then you want to head out the upper side and wrap around through the Max Fury and Fury on Kill rare and magic nodes that you have up here, and then continue going this direction to wrap down to the legendary node itself, which will give you 12% maximum life as Fortify every time that you spend 75 Fury, so you just get a ton of Fortify every time that you use Kick within the build the way that we have it set up. After that, you want to exit out the left side of the board and stick on the Bone Breaker board itself with the glyph socket in the upper right corner. You want to head directly to the socket itself the way that I have and stick in the Exploit glyph here for bonus vulnerable damage depending on the amount of dexterity purchased in the radius, as well as the secondary effect of making enemies vulnerable whenever you hit them on a 20-second internal cooldown for each individual enemy. You want to grab the defensive rare node up here, ignoring the offensive one. Then you also want to grab as much dexterity as you can reasonably mop up in the radius. Then you want to head out the top side of the board and attach the Flawless Technique board. And then you also want to put the glyph socket of the board on the right side of it to make it easier to actually get to. Then path up through here through the Havoc node on the left for extra critical strike damage and extra physical damage too. Both of those are great, so you want to grab all of it. Grab the crit damage magic nodes that are around it too and path up to reach our final glyph socket. In here you want to slot in the Imbiber glyph for bonus damage while above 80% health for for every nearby 5 willpower purchased in the radius, as well as the bonus effect of 30% bonus potion healing. Use your remaining points to just grab the defensive rare node that's in here, as well as the magic nodes nearby, then as much willpower as you can to fuel the imbiber glyph within the radius, and then you will be done. Paragon board complete, all your points spent. That's everything as far as what you need to how to put the build together, but how do you play the build itself? Well, quite simply, you walk towards a pack of enemies, use your shouts when you're in range of them having the cooldown resetting from the Bold Chieftain's aspect, Challenging Shout first to activate damage reduction immediately, then War Cry to start your berserking, then Rallying Cry for the bonus fury generation, then leap into the most dense pile of enemies for maximum cooldown reduction. If there are enough enemies, you can just keep leaping to your heart's content, which is just freaking fantastic to do. Once the group dies down and your leap starts to go on cooldown, or if there are any particularly scary elites within the group, use Kick when at maximum fury for a load of burst damage against them. This will reset leap cooldown whenever you use this, so you can keep leaping. Ground Stomp is an emergency stun, but also an emergency leap cooldown reset. In single target fights, you want to replace Ground Stomp specifically on your bar with Lunging Strike, use Leap if it's off cooldown, Lunging Strike to build Fury if you need to, then Kick when at maximum Fury for your big bit of burst. Simple as that, it's not too complex. This build as a whole then is really just a ton of fun. Again, it is not the strongest bar build by a fair bit, honestly, but it's good enough to take on a nightmare dungeon that is 15 to 20 levels higher than you at least, and it's both a ton of fun to actually use, leaping around the place just constantly, and it's just sort of silly with your highest damage move individually in the build being just a straight up kick to the face. I love that. This build existed before the recent patch, but it wasn't all that usable. Thankfully in the patch itself, they dramatically lowered the base cooldown of Kick, which makes it much stronger both as our burst damage and as a way to reset the cooldown of Leap itself when necessary. That's it then. I hope you've enjoyed this breakdown of the Dropkick Leapquake build, and I hope you enjoy using it for yourself if you try it out too. Let me know down in the comments what kind of barbarian build you'd like to see my take on in the future, and I'll try and make the best version of them for you to use in actual combat. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.